Okay, so welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining. Today, we're actually going to walk through a very exciting topic that's also close to my heart, web and app. We've been getting a lot of questions from customers about how to combine these two data sets. So I think, it's time that we actually address this topic and show you guys real examples of how to combine web and app, combine the dots to answer some of those critical questions about who your competitors are, your true competitors, who's leading the market, how big your audience is, so that you really know where to grow. And we'll really try to kind of make sure that this is not like a lecture, but a real sort of examples to show you real world examples of how connecting these two data sets, connecting the dots, can help uncover some really meaningful insights. And of course, if you have any questions throughout the session, please use the Q&A feature, right? The chat or the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we'll be happy to take them at the end. Next, Delaney. Okay, so just before we get started, just a quick introduction. So my name is Sapir. I'm from the product marketing team, and I'm joined by Ben Smith, who's heading our advisory services team. Hello, Ben.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you.
And Delaney, our wonderful enterprise customer success manager, is going to be sharing a lot of interesting insights about one of her clients that she's working closely with. So, welcome, Delaney. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Sophia.
Um, and between the three of us, we spend a lot of time helping customers understand the changing competitive landscape and the changing customer journeys, and also looking at web and app together. And we're really excited to kind of walk through this with you, share some of those insights, and hopefully give you some new ways of thinking about how to combine web and app data. But first, let's start with what's changing. So this is a really interesting insight that we've pulled from our latest report, which I'll share with you at the end of the session. We're seeing that competition isn't just growing, it's fragmenting, right? So AI, as you know, you've probably heard this many times before, but AI has really removed the barriers to launching digital products, whether that's websites or any kind of digital product, or in this case, apps. We know there are many tools available at the moment: Lovable, Base 44, Claude, right? And all of these are making it extremely easy, fast, cheap to build an app overnight. And what we're seeing is a massive spike in app releases. This is straight from Similarweb data. We're seeing 120,000 apps being released every single month. And you can see that the spike has gone crazy right as agentic coding was released. And what this means is that we're seeing new competitors are basically, as I said, emerging overnight and are gaining traction faster than before. Okay, so the competitors that you thought you had yesterday may not be the ones that you're going to have tomorrow because of now the agentic coding. Okay, so just on the next slide, what we're seeing is that this isn't limited to one category. Actually, we're seeing this across several categories. Okay, so no matter what industry you're coming from, productivity, entertainment, finance, travel, what else is here? Lifestyle, right? We're seeing that roughly 50% more apps are being released to the market more than last year. Okay, so that's a massive jump. And really, I think the question is, how do I identify as a company who, whether you're more app first or whether you're more web first, how do you identify new and meaningful competitors before they become bigger threats, right? When they're able to be kind of launching much faster. So Delaney, I'm really curious because you're on the front line. You're speaking to customers daily, especially with enterprise clients as well, and a lot of customers that have both presence on app and web. Is this coming up in conversation? Do you see that companies are starting to look more into app and are more interested in combining web and app?
Yeah, definitely getting a complete view of the market. It is a big conversation right now. And you talked about fragmentation, like of all the different apps coming onto the market. But it's not only about the fact that it seems like anybody and their grandmother can build an app now if they want to, but it's also about like this fragmentation of attention. So obviously, search, I mean, as much as people like to talk about search is dead, it's not. People are still using it. But we are seeing kind of the shift in the journey because you've also got people doing the research on LLMs. They might be going to retail media, marketplaces, not to mention social, which is huge. So in that context, having an app is even more strategic because it's giving you this direct line that cuts through all of that directly to your audience. So if you are only looking at web, I mean, you are going to be running into quite a few challenges. The first one, you already kind of touched on this, Sapir. It's around competitors. So we've all probably seen that there's big apps out there. I think Temu, really obvious example. I'm sure all of you have been bugged by some Temu advertising at some point. But I bring them up because they're like a perfect example of this app that just came out of nowhere and really focused on being app first right from the get-go. So they've actually held the #1 spot on the App Store for about 3 consecutive years, and they've only really been around maybe 3.5. So really, really impressive trajectory. But if you were only looking at their web traffic during that time, you might have completely missed the scale of what they've built. Because by the time they actually start showing up in these traditional web benchmarks, they've already got this really like big engaged audience and they're directly cutting into market share. Another really good example is Shein, which has exactly the same story. So we can see that actually their web traffic is declining, but the app engagement is a completely different story. So it really kind of like highlights a completely different set of competitors that you wouldn't see if you'd only focused on the web. The second challenge is really about getting a very clear view of how big an audience actually is. So it's entirely possible that web traffic could be declining while app activity is increasing. I just mentioned Shein. But another really good example of this is if you have a brand that is actively pushing people towards the app experience, even from the web. So you would really see this clearly, for example, with Temu's checkout flows. So if you look at traffic to the web checkout section, you'll see that it actually looks really low, but that's because at that point in the purchase journey, they really deliberately push you to complete the purchase in the app. So the web figure is almost completely meaningless in isolation if you're not also combining it with an understanding of what's actually happening on the web. So here, once again, if you're only looking at the web picture, you're missing like half the map. And the final thing is maybe even the most strategic. It's about where you find growth opportunities and how you build your strategy. And this really comes down to understanding where is your audience attention going beyond your own brand. I touched on this earlier when I said attention is fragmenting. So what we see now is that discovery and conversion are increasingly happening in very different places. So social, I don't think this is news for anybody, but this is becoming like the main place where people are finding new products. But that actual purchase, when it happens, will happen somewhere completely different. So if you're only tracking web, you might be seeing all these conversion signals, but you only have half the picture about what is actually prompting that interest in your brand or where else they were looking along the way. And that's where app data can come in because it can actually show you, okay, where else is your competitors or where else are your competitors cutting in on your customers' attention, where else your customers actually going, and where their attention is split. So with these 3 blind spots in mind, let's jump to actually looking at a real example now.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to take you through 2 parts, really. But so what we've decided to do is look at the UK second-hand market. And to be honest, the results that we saw were actually very surprising to us. And it just reiterates why we really think you need to be looking at a combined view of web and app, because if you're just looking at one, you can make the wrong business decisions and ultimately look at the wrong competitors and what strategies they're taking to grow. So first of all, I'll just take you through what is in the dashboard and how we look at this. So essentially, we have taken our normal Similarweb web data and then combined that with our app session data metrics. And there's 2 views within this within these dashboards. First of all is a web and app combined traffic share. This is really about looking at who is winning in the market, where users are spending their time, and also the change over time. But then we also have deduplicated audiences. And this is looking at where does one single user browse and how do they move from websites and to apps. Now, where we sit well in the market and where our USP is where we're able to also show you how those users are moving across competitors and able to benchmark across them. So let's jump into some real data. So first, I'm going to go through web and app traffic share, and then Delaney will take you through some insights in terms of deduplicated. So what we have here, I said it's the UK second-hand market. It's from September 25 to February 26. First of all, we have a clear winner in this market that we looked at. So Vinted has got 37.4% total market share. But as you start to look into this more deeply, you realize that it's skewed towards app. So in the third column, you see app share. So they are app first, and they've got 42% share of that market. And why I say it was surprising is we always assumed that eBay would be way, way higher than Vinted. Now, we have been seeing growth in Vinted, but just not to this level. And you can see eBay is in second place with 28.6% share, but with a very different mix between web and app. What you can also start to see is some smaller brands that are in the same space. Although they don't have a lot of share now, we're able to track the whole market in granularity. So we think it's really important to be looking at the tail of the market as well as the big players to really understand what the right decisions are to make for your business. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. So I sort of mentioned it already, but what is dangerous if you're just looking at just web traffic or just app traffic alone is you can get a very distorted view of the actual reality. So this table here is looking at just the web traffic share. I've pulled it out from the previous table. Now, if you just looked at this, in fact, Vinted were ranked number 9 in the total market. So if you basically saying, well, they're not a big player in this area. And Etsy suddenly are 38%. And then eBay gets to that level that, to be honest, we were expecting. We thought they would be at that sort of like level. What I would say is it gives you this incomplete picture. So if you just look at web, you cannot make those big strategic decisions, but also those operational decisions and learn from the right competitors about how they're winning or where you need to defend. So looking at the next slide, we also think it's super important to be looking at the change over time. So how is the momentum changing? And Sapir spoke about how we're seeing so many more apps coming onto the market, and we're seeing this across all markets, where the exponential growth of businesses and retailers and CPG companies, some of them are growing incredibly fast because the barriers to entry to set things up and actually scale quickly are dropping. So what's great about this view as well is we can start to look at the change over time. So let's have a look at that. So essentially, we can see here that Vinted total share, they have a year-on-year increase of 4.28% percentage points. So again, clear winner, clearly the dominant company in this space and growing faster. However, for Vinted, it's really important to understand that Whatnot, although they're small in the market at the moment, they're equally growing very well. Now, why is this important? So this is good for Vinted because they can understand, okay, we're dominant, we should keep investing, but also for the other companies, it can really highlight where there's big gaps in and vulnerabilities in what they're doing. So let's look at the next slide. The beauty of having web and app together as well is you're able to create the metric of app penetration rate. So essentially that is what percentage of total traffic is your app of that. Now, this is something that all businesses will track internally. Why? Because you know that if you have more users on your app, you have more loyal customers, you have more sticky customers, and often they convert at a much higher rate. So having an app strategy and driving your users into your app really protects you from that market. And again, you can see Vinted has basically 100% app strategy. They have very little on desktop. Now you could desktop and mobile. You could argue that actually they've got space to grow in web as well. But if I was Etsy, I'd be looking at this in number 9 position. Such a big brand and such a high rate of share on web. They are fairly exposed because they're not getting those loyal customers. Well, they're getting loyal customers, but they're vulnerable to losing those customers to others. So what I'll do now is I'll hand you over to Delaney, who will go through deduplicated, because this we think is the other real missing part of understanding web and app together.
Cool. Thanks, Ben. So before we actually look at the competitors, let's just get a baseline figure and actually say like, okay, what actually is the size of Vinted's audience? So the work that we did, we looked into this and we were able to measure that across web and app combined, Vinted's audience size is 20.7 million unique users. And I really want to emphasize the word unique here because when we say unique in this context, we're talking about deduplicated. So what that means, as Ben briefly explained before, is that each user is counted once, regardless of whether they're hitting the site on desktop, maybe on the mobile, or on the app. So it kind of sounds like I'm just mentioning like a technical detail here, but it's actually pretty significant because to deduplicate at that scale, you can't just have like a lot of user data. You actually need the data to be unified and cohesive. And the secret sauce of how Similarweb actually does this is on our backend, we are able to assign anonymous IDs to all the users that we track, which actually lets us link up their web and app behavior and kind of tie it back to the same underlying person. And that's actually very hard to do, and not everybody in this space can do it, but it actually allows us to give this really accurate view of actually what is the total audience size that we're looking at. So the next question that we wanted to look at is how does that audience overlap with Whatnot? Like this deduplicated audience, how does that overlap with Whatnot's deduplicated audience? And what we actually found is that, okay, Whatnot is the fastest growing player in the category. But it's interesting to see that all of their audience, all 660,000 of them, are completely shared with Vinted. So we see that they're like basically completely contained within Vinted's audience. They're both speaking to exactly the same people. So this is kind of curious because it means that Whatnot hasn't popped up and is kind of like building their own unique audience from scratch. It's actually gaining traction among the very people that Vinted is already speaking to. So this is a really different competitive dynamic. And then the question for Vinted would be not like how you go about acquiring those users, because they are already Vinted users. The question for Vinted would be, why are they actually spending time that they could be spending on Vinted with somebody else? And if we compare that to a more established competitor that I'm sure you all know, we see here that the story with eBay is quite different. So Whatnot represents an emerging competitor, but eBay is a very mature competitive relationship. And what we're seeing here is that nearly half of Vinted's audience is also using eBay. So what's interesting about this story is the audience that Vinted isn't reaching. So we can actually see that eBay has a reach of 18.6 million customers or people that aren't actively using Vinted's app or web properties. And so that means that there is both a retention story for Vinted, but there's also a potential expansion opportunity there to the size of that 18.6 million extra people. So then the question with all of this is, okay, what does Vinted learn from all of this? Obviously, we have a lot of data at Similarweb. We live and breathe it, but the real value comes from how do we actually turn those insights into action? So here I'm going to hand over to the expert. Ben, can you talk with us a little bit about what these overlaps might tell us? You with us, Ben? I
Sorry,
think you put yourself on mute. Classic.
sorry. No, sorry, my internet cut out and I just came back on. Sorry, I'm back.
All right. I was just handing over to you to talk with us a bit about, okay, what actually do these overlaps tell us? Like, where actually are those actionable insights that Vinted can start putting into practice?
Yeah, sure. So there's a big part around. So if we talk about the sort of the marketing side of things as well. So it's all about, for me, defending and growing. So if there is a view where you now know where your audience is playing, you can now actively target that audience wherever they are likely to be discovering you. So from that, that could quite honestly be around increased PPC marketing or brand marketing in those areas. but it really is just having a very much more of a targeted view that enables you to target and to really do it in an efficient way. From an inventory point of view, again, for retailers, CPG companies, this is about really saying, okay, we now know who our competitors are. We now know where they are shopping and where they're likely to be going elsewhere. And actually, you can then start to really understand and benchmark against them and understand what they're doing in order to basically become more attractive and to capture more of that share as well. And then finally, in these types of areas as well, yes, you can compare against your competitors or your closest competitors, but with our data, we look at the whole market. So, and you can actually have as many matches as you want in this view. So you can start to be looking at, okay, when my audience is coming to me, what other apps are they using? What other areas on the online space are they working? So often we see huge amounts of linkage to places like Reddit app or other shopping sites, those types of things. And again, that would allow you to be able to target and market in those areas. Okay. So let's go on to the next slide, please. So then we're talking about like, okay, so how can eBay gain those eBay users? So first of all, we know eBay as a strategy is an open marketplace, selling everything. Vinted as a strategy is all about, or it started at least selling clothing and clothing, and that's where they've grown. But with this data, it highlights where that TAM is, where that addressable market is, and where they could start to increase into eBay's business. And with the same infrastructure, the same marketing strategies, just with a slight change in categories, they can start to move over. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing Vinted now are expanding into areas like furniture and things like that. Also, what you can use is all of our other data to really get into those details. So we have retail intelligence data, which can give you product level data. We have keyword data, which can help you understand at a category level how people are searching and what they're searching for. So taking this just gives you that direction, and then you can go deeper into more insights. The other part is around new markets. So our data is global and split into markets. So yes, Vinted in this case is looking at the UK, but we can now do the same, look at it into the US or other countries. And first of all, you can get a view of what that competitor set is in that market. But also you can start to then track, if you do grow into new markets, how that's changing over time. So again, if you go in often in the past with new market entries, you'd go in with desk research, but with our data, you've got live real-time views that can actually give you that sort of take the blinkers off and give you that sort of view of the market in order to make the right decisions. And then finally, new buyer segments. So this is really trying to understand, like we know that Depop, for instance, is much more related to the Gen Z and younger audience. And actually, this can give an understanding of like where is Vinted sat in that market, or where are the competitors in that market. And if that is the strategy in order to grow into that market, they now have a data point, to identify the size and the priority of it, but also over time they can track their performance as they implement their strategies. Okay, pass over to you. Sapir, sorry, I think we might be having internet issues.
No, no, all good. Okay, so this is great. Thank you so much, guys. And I think we covered a lot for today. So I just want to kind of connect it all and to summarize. So I think ultimately we saw, how web only measurement is kind of distorting your view of the market. It's distorting your view of who your competitors are and your audience size. And with Similarweb, you're able to connect the dots, connect web and app, so that you can turn some of those blind spots into those growth opportunities. You have a clearer view of your market size, of who your real competitors are. So if you're looking at web alone, you might be missing a competitor that is growing really rapidly on app. The same thing with your audience size. When you are deduplicating your audience, you're able to see clearly what is my true audience size across web and app, and how is that overlaid with other competitors? Where is my audience exclusive, and where is my audience shared, or where am I losing my audience to some of the other competitors? And then you can do those drill downs. And finally, I'm able to detect competitors early, ones that I would be completely blind to if I'm only looking at one channel. So I think at the moment, we're getting a couple of questions. So if you have any more, feel free to use the chat. Um, okay, so I'm just going to give some time for a couple more people to ask some questions. In the meantime, if you go to the next slide, Delaney. I just want to take the opportunity to share that this is the report where we had the insights early on in the webinar. It's called the App Explosion After AI and What It Means. You can scan the QR code over here and to download it. And I think we can address some of the questions. So, Ben, so one of the questions I'm seeing is, how do I get this view if I only have a license to web intelligence?
Yeah, so we require web intelligence and app intelligence in the contract because it's the two data sets. And then from that view, we create a standalone dashboard combining this with our custom methodologies, essentially.
Okay. And I think one of the other questions that I'm seeing is, how do we actually deduplicate the audience? So what is, I guess, the methodology behind combining your audience across web and app? How do we do this practically?
Practically, I can't go into all the details on it. However, essentially what we're able to do, because we have real user behavior and we're able to look at what real users are doing, we can see in that time that they're on the websites and on the apps, where were they browsing across that time. And then we do some we do some very clever data science work in order to isolate one single user and how their journeys went through.
Hmm. Okay. Um, Also here, how many companies can we track when we are combining web and app traffic?
Yeah, so in the dashboard, we would say you can go up to 50 to 100 companies, really.
Mhm.
But often the best way to look at it, we think, is look at the specific markets that you're doing, and that may only be 10 to 15. But the answer is we
Mhm.
can go up to basically 100.
Okay. And I'm just going to take one last question. So we said, can we get this view using your MCP?
Um, in essence, you could do that. So you can do that. You'd have to prompt it and say, I need web, and then you need to create a calculated metric, which is app views. But that's really only for the share. That's for the traffic share. For deduplicated, this isn't included into our MCP because it's a much more of a custom delivery.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, guys. It's been a pleasure. And thank you for everyone who joined us. And we hope to see you in our next session.